Hi friends. At the outset, I'd like to thank KOSCON for giving me this opportunity to present my video on how to do Phaco in small pupil without the aid of pupil expanders. I'll start sharing my screen now. I'll be pausing the video in between whenever I feel I need to explain the procedure in a greater detail. I suggest you all to use a pupil expander whenever the pupil is compromised. This video shows how to do Phaco in case one doesn't have a pupil expander at hand. Always try to get some amount of dilatation with intracameral xylocaine, adrenaline, phenocaine, viscomydras, etc. My video shows how to do in case one doesn't have a pupil expander and when none of the above measures work. So, as usual, we make the side ports and also the main entry wound. So here I want to make the point number one. The point number one is to make an anterior entry. The reason is an anterior entry prevents iris prolapse. Any iris prolapse worsens the already small pupil and makes the surgery more cumbersome. So the point number two is to maintain a deep anterior chamber. So a deep anterior chamber gives a slightly more dilatation of the pupil, especially if the pupil is elastic, but may not be much of a help if the pupil is non-elastic, like in pseudo exfoliation. So the main entry tunnel is made, and then the antechamber is reformed. Don't be overassured over viscomydriasis because this is only temporary. This is only temporary, and the pupil constricts back again once the AC becomes less tighter. So now I start doing the rhexis. The rhexis should be quite adequate. It should be as wide as the pupil or even more. The reason is we do not want to do the emulsification in the bag. We want to prolapse the nucleus out of the capsular bag, and we want to do the emulsification in the iris plane. So the rhexis is completed by tangentially pulling the rhexis margin along the pupillary pod. So the anterior chamber is deepened in between, and then the rhexis is completed. So always ensure that you have a mobile nucleus in the bag. This is all the more important as we do not want to do emulsification in the bag. Therefore, one has to do a multi-point hydrodissection to ensure complete separation of the nucleus from the capsule. Always try to rotate and confirm that the nucleus is mobile. So the anterior chamber is deepened again with viscoelastic, and now it's time to start the Phaco emulsification, but with a slight difference in technique. So the loose cortex is aspirated and the trenching is initiated. So I make 2 or 3 trenches. So once it becomes deeper, then I hold the nucleus with the Phaco handpiece. So here comes the most important point I want to make today. Always crack with your left hand. Generally, while cracking, we move both the hands in opposite directions to achieve a good separation of the nuclear fragments. But because the pupil is compromised, the pupil is smaller, you do not want your Phaco handpiece to go and touch the iris. So any iris touch will cause iris chafing, which will hinder a satisfactory emulsification of the nucleus. So now we make all the 4 quadrants. So if you observe, in all these maneuvers, I'm not uh, using my right hand more. All the cracking is done with the left hand. So the point number 6 is to do a minimal or no movement with the right hand. I made a small animation here for a better understanding. So if you see, the right hand doesn't move. It's only the cracking is done with the left hand only. I'll show the same thing in slow motion and high magnification for you to understand very clearly. So the point number 7 is to emulsify the iris in the emulsify the nucleus in the iris plane. And the nucleus is pulled out of the capsular bag and emulsified. One has to avoid blindly doing the emulsification behind the iris because it might injure the iris, which might worsen the pupil. It might injure the rhexis margin, which we do not want to have. So all the nuclear fragments are pulled out of the capsular bag and emulsified. This I am showing it in a slightly higher speed. And all the 4 quadrants are emulsified now. So as we are doing the emulsification in the iris plane, one has to give a good viscoprotection to the endothelium. The next point is to search and remove all the loose cortical matter. So one has to peep behind the iris and then look for loose cortical matter, and one has to remove the cortex in toto because any leftover cortex can cause postoperative iritis. So now the cortex is removed. It's time to time to implant the lens in the bag. So while implanting the lens in the bag, it's always better to inject at the center of the pupil, injecting lens straight into the bag. So it is always better to avoid wound assisted technique, even though in this particular case, I'm not doing one. The reason is the injector is quite bulky. I didn't want to enlarge the incision anymore. But it's advised not to use a wound assisted technique in small pupils. This is all the more important if the pupil is really small because one is not able to make out the rhexis margin very clearly and you do not know whether the lens has gone into the bag or not. To sum up, the most important point I would like to make is to always use your left hand while cracking the nucleus. So depend less on your right hand, which avoids the iris touch. Any iris touch will draw the iris towards the phaco handpiece whenever the aspiration is activated, and it makes the surgery very cumbersome and hinders efficient emulsification of the nuclear fragments. Thank you very much.